Thank you, Andres. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me and Emma and everybody, because this is really is a real honor to be at this event for Mesoamérica at this stage. Al contrario de Wolfgang, yo decidí hoy mismo de hablar en inglés. Y la razón es que yo creo que sería muy difícil para los traductores traducir el Yiddish, que es lo que aprendí en los años 90 cuando estaba aquí en el banco. So I'll stick to English for now. I also want to thank the participants here, particularly from the countries, because one of the biggest successes, I think, about this project is the degree of country ownership, the local innovation, and the linkages that you have made with your local clinics and people, and the way you do things. I mean, that's come out through all these things. And for the people who aren't from Salud Mesoamérica countries, people outside of Central America, I know you've also done enormous work over the years, whether it's during the COVID pandemic or whatever, and I hope that some of these experiences look familiar to you from what you're doing, and you can take some of the ideas here to your own countries. I think it's really important to have this kind of exchange among countries. I've been I think it's somebody mentioned that peer-to-peer learning is the strongest. It really is the strongest way to do that. And so I congratulate you for being here, the organizers for bringing you, and welcome you to the event. I also want to recap a little bit about what we've heard today, and part of that, of course, goes back to Don's initial comments about what's going on in the U.S. today, which I also feel strongly about, and I'm very apologetic as an American citizen, because our country is too powerful and too rich to go down this route. And the other part of it is that so much of what we're talking today about Mesoamérica is about recognizing, as Emma mentioned, the macro and the micro. That if the macro is in the right context, right setup, it can make the micro possible. It doesn't make the micro happen, but it creates the conditions in which the micro level can work much better. And we have many examples where the micro works even though the macro is a mess. And we may need a lot of those in the future. But the basic principles of respect and trust and caring for each other that Don mentioned, and rule of law in the sense not of some objective law, but laws that we as people have democratically enacted through our representatives, and for everybody to abide by those laws. I just see that as sort of like the core of what collective human action is about. And it's collective human action that makes it possible for the species to progress without killing each other off. So I didn't want to miss that part of the story. It's there. We're not going to dwell on that today, but it is intimately connected to what we're going to be doing over the next 5-10 years. And it does also show that connection, an aspect of that macro-micro connection. So it's been a packed day. We've heard about partnerships, models of learning. We've seen some in-depth discussion of these, of two countries, and the purpose of this panel is to look a little bit more at the design aspects of Salud Mesoamérica. And I just want to remind you a bit, sort of going even farther back than today, which is back to 2009, 2010, and remember a little bit about the international health discussion at that time. It was, the Paris Accords were very recent, and that's where countries emphasized the importance of country ownership, harmonization, and flexibility. And at the same time, there was a lot of ferment about results-based financing. I was at the Center for Global Development. We were talking about cash-on-delivery aid. The UK had pilot experiences in results-based aid. The development lab existed at USAID. And then the third other thing that was going on was a lot on rigorous impact evaluation. It was the early years of the MIT Poverty Lab, the years of the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, 3IE, and the DIME initiative at the World Bank. So it really was an amazing period of ferment for ideas and new initiatives around these things. And what happened when I remember meeting Emma and Fernando and Amanda at a conference, I don't know where, it was somewhere here in DC. Heard about Mesoamerica, and I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. They're doing results-based financing. What I didn't realize at the time, or kind of came to realize, is not only were they doing results-based financing, but they were introducing rigorous impact evaluation, independent verification, which was one of the key things I was pushing when I was doing the cash-on-delivery work, implementation by the government, so there's the Paris Accord ownership side, and flexibility and adaptation in implementation. So none of these were new ideas. But as far as I knew, this was the first major program that actually committed to try to do all of them in one bundle. And to be honest, I wasn't. And on the RBF, I just want to say I've pushed the idea of results-based financing, cash-on-delivery aid, not so much as an incentive, and as Don sort of put this it's not an extrinsic incentive, but because it's by linking money to the outcomes that we can clarify what projects are trying to do and make sure that they get measured. It's very common to have projects measure outcomes separately from all the other fiduciary control work that they're doing and not really pay attention to the quality of the results. And my hope in all that was that it would free people from the paperwork side of their project and get them to focus on the results. And that aspect of Salud Mesoamérica, I think, really was realized, and I was very happy to see. But I actually wasn't very optimistic about the program, particularly because of the amount of hands-on technical assistance. I thought every other project I've seen with a lot of hands-on technical assistance imposes the donor or the grantor's ideas. And, as you've heard, Salud Mesoamérica proved me wrong. So, and just how wrong, we're going to hear from this wonderful panel that we have this morning. And I'm going to invite them up and introduce them. And just remind you that they're here speaking in their personal capacity, even though they represent very important institutions. But we asked them to answer questions and everything in terms of their direct experience of the program. So could people please, let's see, it's Ricardo, Natalia, Ethan, and Ignez. Yeah, good. So on my, I think Ricardo should, that's right, that's it. So Ricardo Mújica, here on my left, is the executive director of the Carlos Slim Foundation. And his commitment to health, he really has literally saved lives. In one example, in work that he did in changing attitudes toward organ donation and transplants. And if you think about a more direct way to save lives, that's a pretty amazing one right there. Natalia Beer, to his left, is the technical advisor for maternal child health in the Ministry of Health and Wellness in Belice. She's done decades of work on maternal and child health, but she also oversaw the vaccine procurement and deployment during COVID. And I was pleased to see that she was named Woman of the Year in 2021 by Breaking Belize News. I mean, that's a very important recognition of her and of health. Thank you. To her left, Ethan Wong's Deputy Director of Primary Health Care at the Gates Foundation. And in the course of this, I found out he was hired at the Gates Foundation specifically to work on Salud Mesoamérica. So, sort of good long perspective on this program, but also from different perspectives, because he's moved at different places in the Gates Foundation. And I noted that he's also managed the Joint Learning Network, which, if you have not heard of it, is one of the best peer-to-peer learning networks out there for health. So I was really excited to see that. And then Ignez Tristao at the end is the IDB's country representative in Guatemala. And I would say Guatemala's gain was, in a sense, my loss, because I worked very closely with her before she was reassigned when I was at the IDB here for a short stay during the COVID crisis. And she was in Buenos Aires. And I can tell you how hard she worked under extremely difficult conditions to get resources to Argentina, but also to help them figure out how to negotiate international vaccine agreements and many other things. So thank you for that work, and it's good to see you again. With that, let's start the session. So is this thing working now? Cool. Technology, you know, it move from one to the next seamlessly. Wow. Okay. So the first thing we're going to start out with is this is a little bit like a game show. It's a lightning round. I'm just going to ask everybody up here in order to give me one sentence or even one word about what you think or an element of Salud Mesoamérica that you feel really makes it unique.
Muchas gracias, buenas tardes a todos. Vi lo que tú comentabas, creo que fue atreverse a ser disruptivo, innovador en elementos que existían, que ya había bases para poder generar una alianza de este tipo, pero hacerlo a esta escala me parece que fue completamente innovador y disruptivo.
Okay, thank you. Natalia?
Yeah. Thanks to the organizers of this event for the invitation. Mm-hmm. And I would say quality healthcare is measurable. If we have standards, if we define the processes of care, and we have the necessary inputs, we can make changes in the lives of the population that we serve. Of course, these have to be people-centered and have strong political will. And we do have that in Belize, strong political will from our health authorities and the national government.
Thank you. That's good. Ethan, what would you say?
Thank you for having me. Is this on?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Let's see.
You don't need to do that. Looks like it's blue. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Thank you for having me. And we heard this at multiple points today, but I'd say that measurement as an intervention versus measurement as reporting is what sticks in my mind most. This is a shift in thinking, and Dawn said it very well. It can cut both ways. And I think a big reflection for us is that, honestly, we came in, measurement had a reporting and verification function, and it transformed into something quite different over the life of the initiative.
Okay, measurement intervention. Thank you. Ignez, what would you say?
Bueno, antes quisiera decir lo cuán feliz estoy de estar aquí hoy. La verdad, o sea, casi 10 años de mi carrera fue trabajando con la iniciativa, primero en México y luego en Belice. Entonces, para mí ha sido un privilegio ser parte de esto. No es una palabra, tengo que decir que son 3. Y algunos de los colegas ya me escucharon decir eso. O sea, para mí, parte del éxito que ha tenido la iniciativa se resume en intencionalidad, integralidad y intensidad. Intencionalidad porque desde el inicio había muy claramente las metas y las métricas, y a pesar que estábamos construyendo muchas cosas en conjunto, co-construyendo en conjunto, eso siempre fue muy claro. Entonces, todos sabíamos lo que queríamos lograr. Integralidad, porque el modelo en sí, que es muy completo, o sea, la parte regional, diálogo de políticas, el propio mecanismo de financiamiento basado en resultados, la asistencia técnica y todo ese ambiente de aprendizaje continuo permitió que se trabajara mucho más que solo implementar intervenciones. Lo que se trabajó al mismo tiempo era ir creando los enabling conditions, o sea, las condiciones para que se pudiera ir mucho más allá que esto. Y esto luego influyó sobre la sostenibilidad. Intensidad, porque, o sea, era una presencia continua, trabajando mano a mano, con una asistencia técnica realmente hecha a la medida que combinaba las mejores prácticas, pero también aprendía de forma muy ágil de la experiencia de la implementación en el terreno. Entonces yo diría las tres cosas: intencionalidad, integralidad e intensidad.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's a really good set of setups for the, I think people can recognize a lot of those from the earlier discussions as well. And let's explore those a little bit more. So Natalia, you mentioned the qualitative care is measurable. As an implementer, you also mentioned something earlier about the way the RBF made a difference early on, but then wasn't as important. And I wonder if you could explore that a bit.
Okay. First, I would like to address the donors and express a big thank you in the name of the people of Belize and the government of Belize for the support provided during the implementation of the initiative in Belize. I would also like to make a reflection. I was going to do it at the end, but I said best I start now. Salud Mesoamérica initiative really works. And the reason why I say that is because throughout the day, we have been hearing experiences from experts, from people on the ground, from national authorities. And I was amazed that in many occasions, I would say, that happened in Belize. We do that in Belize. It's just the how that is different. But really and truly, the package of SMI can be applicable anywhere. But I want to reflect on three aspects. One is ownership. The next one is flexibility of the SMI. And the last point is on added values. So in ownership, I won't repeat what was said earlier, but we all want the same thing: healthy mothers and healthy children in our countries. The how is where you have the diversity among these countries. But we should not take these efforts as for granted. We need to make it sustainable. And the real heroes are those who are interacting with women and children. The rest, right, from the top to the bottom, needs to support that interaction. The second point is flexibility. We receive technical assistance from Salud Mesoamérica based on gaps that were unforeseen, but was necessary for us to achieve the results that we achieve. So we are very appreciative of that. Having a regional team of experts that was constantly supporting the country makes it easier because there was consistency and there was not an interruption in this technical assistance. And talking about flexibility, I would like to give thanks to Salud Mesoamérica initiative because we did some changes locally that required the participation from local donor agencies. And SMI was very open and very supportive for us to make those changes to strengthen the quality improvement. And the performance tranche, when it comes to flexibility, the country decide how to utilize the performance tranche. So I think that is very good and very attractive for any country. Added values, I'll be quick with this. The counterpart funding. We negotiated with Salud Mesoamérica that we would provide in kind counterpart funding, and that was accepted. So we have moved the access to contraceptive commodities by 5-fold during the entire process of these years. Belize is at the point that the results that we achieved in collaboration with Salud Mesoamérica initiative were now being supported with the development of a quality healthcare policy. And this will definitely help the entire system because, yes, SMI was targeting maternal and child health, but with this policy now, it will be the entire health system. Not all at once, but we will go in phases. So we are very We are very happy for that support. And I will just close off by, adolescent birth rate is not an indicator for us. But with the SMI, we strengthen the delivery of postpartum contraception. And in 5 years, we reduce teen pregnancy by more than 40%. So that was unplanned, unforeseen, but it is a result. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. So let's turn to Ricardo. I mean, as Natalia was talking about, clearly there's a lot of benefit to the countries from that ownership, the flexibility. And I guess part of the question is this because it went into countries that had the capacity to do these things, or countries that were very they needed to get the capacity before it made sense to have this kind of results-based financing program? Because it's a very wide range of countries by income, by political system, and all this other stuff. So what's your perspective on that?
Me parece que, como se ha mencionado a lo largo del día, la flexibilidad que tiene la iniciativa, el establecer indicadores muy claros, metas muy claras con las cuales servían para el reporte, daba un set de reglas del juego que nos daba claridad a todos de cuál era la meta para llegar. Pero la forma de trabajar con esas evaluaciones fueron todo un proceso educativo, tanto hacia arriba como hacia abajo, en donde se discutían los resultados, no era blanco y negro, y permitían esta flexibilidad en cómo poder ir adaptando la iniciativa. Ahora hemos estado haciendo una reflexión sobre los 15 años o el periodo que sea de la iniciativa, pero había cortes que creo que corríamos el riesgo de solo estarnos moviendo por ese resultado. Sin embargo, fue todo un proceso de reflexión que en el último de los casos, como lo hemos visto también aquí, llevaba a las historias que estaban sucediendo en la última milla, no solo ese indicador. Internamente, por ejemplo, a nosotros nos funcionaban los indicadores para hacer un reporteo hacia nuestro consejo y los resultados finales, pero lo que nos interesaba en realidad era la última milla con muchos efectos que estaban sucediendo, no solo con este indicador. Entonces, creo que hubo la flexibilidad en ese diálogo que también se ha comentado mucho, en cada uno de los países para poderse adaptar y que no fuera nuevamente blanco y negro, sino tener un trabajo muy flexible que beneficiara a cada uno de los países de acuerdo con las necesidades que se tenían. Entonces me parece que esto, junto con la sistematización de muchos intangibles, es lo que ha permitido tener un resultado tan positivo después de 15 años.
Okay, thank you. So the flexibility and adaptation are part of that story. That's also connected to these other themes. So Ignez, if I can ask you a bit, and actually it's kind of funny, I'm going to ask you a question that's related to Ethan's point, which is about, I mean, you mentioned intentionality, completeness, integralidad, and intensidad. And Ethan mentioned the role that measurement played as a sort of an intervention. And how do you see that? I mean, did that make those other three things possible? Did it change how they functioned? What do you think the role of the independent verification was in all this?
Bueno, la verdad que ha sido crítico. Bueno, tuve el privilegio de trabajar en la iniciativa Mesoamérica desde la conceptualización de la propuesta que se presentó a los donantes, y yo llevaba la parte de la data, ¿no? Entonces, analicé todas las encuestas de salud de cada país, analizando por quintiles los indicadores de salud, y claro, al mismo tiempo contrastábamos después la información con lo que salía de los sistemas de información en salud de los países. Pero cuando ya llegó la data dura de la línea base, vimos que la realidad en estas zonas focalizadas era muy distinta, muy distinta. En algunos casos, partíamos de indicadores donde la cobertura con estos criterios de calidad estaba en 1%, 2%, vis a vis lo que habíamos visto a nivel del sistema de información, que estaba más por ahí de los 30 y 40%. Entonces, imaginás, o sea, en ese momento ya requirió un total calibraje de lo que se tenía que hacer, ¿no? Si no hubiéramos tenido esa data, hubiéramos avanzado muy a las ciegas, porque ahora estamos viendo que estábamos partiendo de un nivel muchísimo más abajo, entonces teníamos que ampliar el nivel de esfuerzo para poder llegar al alcance que se había prometido. Y eso fue un proceso muy de la mano de todos, discutiendo ideas y recalibrando. Entonces ahí ya empezamos a ir adaptando, ¿no? Porque el reto era mucho más grande. Entonces, esa es una primera razón de que fue crítica. Segundo, porque también nos mostró que habían oportunidades de mejora en los sistemas de información y en algunos países también se fue mejorando la forma como se registraba la información. Y algunos también dejó claro de que era importante complementar esa información con otras herramientas de data que luego tuvieron un rol súper importante en el contexto del proceso de mejora continua, porque eran herramientas que permitían a los equipos tener la información casi a tiempo continuo y tomar decisiones y ajustar y calibrar con base a eso. Y un tercer punto, porque también era un mecanismo muy robusto de verificación para los donantes, que permitían ir viendo cómo el progreso se iba dando tanto a nivel de centro de salud, de establecimiento de salud, pero también a nivel de la comunidad, ¿no? de los hogares, que es a donde uno quiere ver cambios. Entonces, fundamental.
Can I just follow up a little bit on the earlier point about, I mean, the surprise of the data and so forth. So what kind of role did that play in the discussions? Because Emma and others have mentioned about the difficulties at the beginning, that the first step was getting a consensus around the problem and the focus of the goals of the program. So was that data sort of like, it's everybody getting around and realizing the same, sort of basic facts?
Sí, o sea, básicamente was going back to the drawing board. En conjunto, ¿sí? Porque no era una data que traía el banco, no, o sea, estábamos todos con esa información ahora y teniendo que tomar decisiones de cómo ajustar, por ejemplo, la cantidad de insumos que quería, que ahora era mayor, ¿no? La cantidad de recurso humano que era necesario. Y en eso también, al final, también sirvió para movilizar recursos adicionales de la contraparte, o sea, de locales, de los gobiernos, porque pues el recurso que traemos también a nivel del proyecto ya estaban definidos. Entonces, eso también, pero se fue creando ese contexto de confianza mutua, incluso porque era una discusión abierta, con información en la mano y todos sabíamos dónde queríamos llegar. Entonces, ahí donde empieza a vincularse, ¿no? El tema de la intensidad, de la intencionalidad, y de llegar con todo lo que se necesitaba.
Interesting. I think it's fascinating the many different ways the measurement of actual results or outcomes that we care about sort of shows up, and whether it's in the design or building a consensus or even building trust among everybody that we're talking about the same stuff. That's quite a powerful aspect. Well, let's, Ethan, if I can shift to you. Partly because you've been involved in the project, throughout, it's kind of like, what's your big picture takeaway? You've seen it it's kind of like watching the kid go off to college, and you say, when did she learn how to be like that? And along the same lines, what to the extent this program was hands-on rather than hands-off, or coaching rather than telling people what to do, how did that play a role in the whole development of the program?
Yeah, so as you had mentioned, I've been with this initiative for 12, coming on 13 years now. So this is a really big moment for me personally, and I think for many folks here. I see faces that I've known for a good portion of my life, and this is a special opportunity. So I'd start by giving a big thank you to the bank for bringing us together. So there's really three things that I want to focus on and reflect on. So the first, and I want to build off of some of what Professor Wolfgang shared with us. There was a schematic with the 6 phases of systems change, and mental models were at the top, and power structures. Great framework, a little abstract, so I hope I can actually bring some personal experiences to shed light on how that resonates in my experience and the Foundation's experience with this initiative. So the first has to do with mental models. And what ended up being, and I don't think we realized it at the time, a pretty fundamental paradigm shift in what this initiative set out to do. Frankly, I think this initiative ended up being a bit of a Trojan horse for us. I don't know if we knew what we were getting into when we signed off on it. I think it made sense on paper for a number of great reasons, but what ended up unfolding was a lot of learnings for us, which I'll say more about. But we've talked a lot about health equity being the headline for this initiative. That is why the Gates Foundation wanted to be here. But there's actually 2 goals, and we've talked a little less about the second, but it was really important for our organization, which is how do you drive results and reduce health inequities, but how do you do it in an enduring way? How do you do it in a way that you can leave something stronger than when you started? And then importantly, how can you exit? And I think that's an important question for a donor organization, because I think we can see patterns where if you don't plan for that, there becomes a dynamic that actually doesn't solve the problem itself. So Emma had mentioned earlier the importance of building for scale and building for sustainability from the beginning. And that was really important. But I want to share a few reflections of what that was like for a donor organization, the ways in which that was different than how we typically work in other settings. First, the incentives and the dynamics surrounding a typical development project usually drive a development partner to jump in directly. You see the problems, and so you want, either through your own actions or through organizations you hire to go and do targeted things, you want to jump in and chase bottlenecks, you want to solve procurements, you want to push implementation, and these are all for very good reasons. We know why we're here, we know the actual problems on the ground, and we want to see those results now. So it's a very hands-on approach to the question. And honestly, a hands-off approach for a donor can feel a bit threatening. So this is my view and experience, because honestly, if we're not hands-on, what role do we play, right? That's part of our job. That's part of why we exist, is to try to solve the problems that are there. And I'm accountable to bosses, right? So in my role, I'm the focal point to this initiative. So I sit on the donor committee and help make some of the decisions at that level. But if I'm accountable to my bosses, how can I ensure that results are happening if I'm not directly involved? So maybe I'll share a bit of a personal story. So as the lead for the Gates Foundation on this for 12 years or close to it, which, by the way, I think I may hold a record. Somebody will have, my organization will have to verify. Usually program officers, people, they roll off of these things, or projects are only 5 years long. So I don't think anybody's ever been on the same project for 12 years. I'll go chase that down to see if it's true. But as the lead for this, I've been in some somewhat uncomfortable situations that are, frankly, professionally a little bit rife in some internal meetings. So it's pretty common that you are asked very specific operational questions about what you're working on. And it would be expected that you know those things like the back of your hand, because it's a byproduct of being in the weeds day to day. I know what happened last week because I call Emma every single day stressfully and ask her what's going on. But that's not the way that we designed this. We designed it to be very hands-off. So in those moments and some high-level meetings, I wasn't able to provide very concrete, specific examples. And that could have been a negative outcome for me. Now, I'm here, I survived, I'm very happy to say it. But speaking again, we talked about mental models and power dynamics. The power dynamics that we exist in around development projects don't map to how this program was designed. So what I've come to learn is that if we're hands-off, it means somebody else is hands-on. And this is the insight for me that makes this initiative special and different, and maybe something that is going to be useful for other things we do around the world. I think the real insight of this initiative is about activating accountability chains, and that sounds really conceptual. But I think what we've talked about in practice is that there are actual stewards of these systems who are actually the ones waking up every morning delivering the care. The funding, the technical assistance, the data, these are all important, but they're kind of wraparound supports to the people at the center who are doing all this work. And so I think that is actually the real insight, is releasing some of that, what ends up being power, and seeding it with the folks that are actually in charge of the work and getting it done is the real insight, I think, of this initiative. And so my takeaways, I'm going to say some less kind things now because I think they're true, but they're important. One is, it took longer. Like, so what are the takeaways of a hands-off approach? It took longer. We've talked about the cumulative years spent negotiating projects. Has anybody, I'd be so curious if people could say how long this initiative has been in place. Over lunch, some of us were joking. Somebody said 10 years, 12 years, 16 years. I looked up, our grant agreement was signed in 2009.
June 2009.
And 9.
What?
Jaime and I went to the CEO to get this approved at the foundation. And it took 2 years for the rest of the colleagues to join. You guys joined 1 year later, Spain later, etc. No, December, but.
So it took a long time. Negotiating projects, gaining buy-in, getting alignment, but that's the center of what the ownership transfer actually looks like. And implementation took longer, and maybe the results could have gone further if we had driven in with outside organizations, but what would have happened the day that project ended? And I think that's the pattern we see in much of other development, is the next project needs to come along, and then we're back in the trap. I feel like I've used too much time. I wanted to share a few more things, but I think that the last things I want to share, 10 seconds. This has been very informative for the Gates Foundation. The work that I know most of the folks in this room are directly involved in this initiative. Been very informative. So one, we've heard about the malaria initiative in the region that was modeled directly off of this. Is something that the Gates Foundation invested in and continues to. We work with the Islamic Development Bank on something called the Lives and Livelihood Fund. We've directly taken lessons from this and brought it to that bank, who probably finds itself in the same place that the IADB did at the beginning of a bit of a paradigm shift. And then finally, I am now a deputy director on our primary healthcare team. We've never had a primary healthcare team. And the lead up to having a strategy and a budget approved by our chair to go and work in many countries around the world, part of that evidence base was this initiative. So the focus on performance management, the importance of data visibility, local accountability, and autonomy, those are all features of work that we do now in over a dozen countries around the world. So I want to just say that this has been very important. So the impact that you all have had in your specific countries and your specific roles have contributed to things that we've been able to take globally through the work we get to do elsewhere.
Thanks, Ethan. That was great. So we have some further dissemination going on, it sounds like, further scaling, and that's pretty good. So in the spirit of the game show, we're now tied, 4 contestants with brilliant insights. Let's have one more, before we open up to questions, one more quick round of what would you do differently in the next program? I mean, I imagine you've already thought about this if you're working in IREM and the malaria program, but sort of one takeaway from Salud Mesoamérica that you would make sure happens in another project, and one thing that you would, you'd like to do better or try? That's a tough one. Ricardo, you want to kick off?
Sí, con mucho gusto. De hecho, sumando a lo que está comentando Ethan, los aprendizajes de esta sesión y de toda esta reflexión nos sirven a nosotros mucho para la implementación de otras iniciativas. Desde la Fundación estamos trabajando en una iniciativa para la atención de la pobreza en México. Todo este proceso de intencionalidad, de sistematización, de comunicación de abajo hacia arriba, son elementos que nos llevamos para poder implementarlos en una iniciativa, diría que renovada, con los aprendizajes y los éxitos de Salud Mesoamérica, para poderlo llevar a zonas también de alta marginación en México. Entonces, sin duda también hay una réplica de todo lo que se puede estar haciendo. Una siguiente reflexión que también quiero hacer con lo que comenta, con estos comentarios es, al inicio de la iniciativa creo que todo este tiempo que llevaron las negociaciones generaron mucha tensión, mucha ansiedad, en donde queríamos comenzar de manera inmediata. Pero a la vuelta de los años, creo que fue el tiempo adecuado para generar una planeación intencionada, las tres Is que menciona Ignez, que nos permitieron lograr resultados positivos. Podríamos haberlo hecho tal vez un poco más rápido, pero creo que se hubieran perdido muchos de los elementos que hicieron exitoso a Salud Mesoamérica. Entonces, eso es algo que a la vuelta de los años creo que lo tomamos como un sentido positivo. Nos llevó más tiempo, pero aseguramos resultados mucho más exitosos. Y como una siguiente reflexión, la iniciativa fue adaptándose a elementos de información, no solo en las evaluaciones de impacto, sino de monitoreo, para poder tener data continua, para poderse ir adaptando. Yo creo que un elemento central, pensando en un mundo diferente 2010 a 2025, sería precisamente el integrar los elementos de un ecosistema de salud digital. Hoy tenemos mucho más potencial que nos permitiría, iniciando hoy de cero hacia adelante, hay muchas herramientas adicionales que creo que serían muy benéficas para un proyecto de esta naturaleza. Creo que nos llevaría a plantear objetivos, procesos distintos y poder aprovechar todo este potencial que nos da la salud digital.
Okay, muy bien. ¿Y Natalia?
Yeah, I would like to say that we welcome the internal and external evaluations because that really tell us where we are as a country. And while we look at it as just an indicator or processes of care, that is what is closer to the patient. So we need to make sure that we do that investment. And I remember when we started with evaluating the indicators, there were a few that we were in zero. And the staff really did feel bad, but we encouraged them, this is the beginning of the ending of the zeros. Yep. And that really hit positively among the staff. And maybe doing something different would be establishing or helping the countries to establish the structure for the quality healthcare, meaning a policy, and whatever other investment is needed. Why? Because the investment coming from the projects would then be maximized with the healthcare workers' competency. So, but SMI definitely works.
Very good. Ethan, what would you say?
In terms of things that we keep, that are very important. A broken record, but the measurement is, it can't not be said.
Yeah.
A bit of thoughtful, independent measurement to complement routine data systems, I think is an important insight.
I won't argue with the error.
Something else, I was kind of joking earlier that we misnamed something a long time ago. We called Emma's group the coordination unit. They're originally funded to have, I think, 1 staff, maybe 2 staff. And I think I might call it the catalytic unit, I think is a better name for it. So when I think about how to execute a project like this, you can't undervalue the importance of the role that the bank has played in the middle of all of this. I don't think it's a set it and forget it scheme that would just run without something catalytic in the middle. And then what I would do differently, we had originally intended to have some local advocacy and kind of civil society engagement, social accountability components, which we unfortunately just didn't have the resources for. And I think we've all observed across our countries, and especially in recent years, a bit of a rolling back of the prioritization of health, even despite gains, and it defies some political logic. And I think making health politically and socially salient is an important ingredient that we miss oftentimes, falls to the cutting floor.
Okay, so, and Ignez, what would you say?
Well, keeping with the culture of transformation that has characterized the initiative, I think the model is very successful, and we have heard for so many voices today about that. Now, I think there are 3 elements that now thinking, having to do it again or doing something like this in other settings that I would think. One is planning the scaling up. Although this was not a pilot, because as you saw, it was huge in terms of the number of people, the number of health services, hospitals involved. And we have seen in the end, in many countries, that several interventions, they were scale up at the national level. But now thinking back, perhaps we could have been planning more for that or more intentional. For instance, thinking in adding a tranche that facilitate that at the end in terms of incentivizing that in the context of the phase out. Because that came up naturally, right, in many countries. But perhaps if we had more intentionality on that, perhaps more of that would have came out. Second, when we designed this, social media and networks were not yet a big thing. Now it is. So although we have touched in this, Wolfgang has mentioned that in terms of the communication, Ricardo mentioned that. I think that also now I would add a component that is strengthen the communication and the narrative at the local level. Because we did build things in terms of communication within the system and between the teams, but now that we have all this learning and the experience, I would add something like that. And a third thing, which I think is a challenge, that we haven't solved it yet, but we have to think about that. That is also related to sustainability. It is that, at least in this region, what is constant is the turnover of health workers. It's just unbelievable. And although, with the intentionality and the intensity, while the initiative was there, this was managed because we had mechanisms to very quickly, fill people in. With that intentionality and presence, I don't know how much of that it's going to stay with the change, because in some countries when it changes government, it changes a lot of people. So I think this is an open question to think about it. How in a health system you do onboarding? I haven't seen that. Actually, you hire people, you move people, but you don't do onboarding. And of course, you have norms, and this is, is one way of institutionalize things. But I think we can do more of that and be more innovative about that. And I think it's still an aspect that we need to do a lot more work and a lot more learning on how to do that. And I agree with Dr. Beer. I don't want to think of that as an ending. I think that's a good beginning. It's a good point to begin and to start dreaming what is going to be the next goals.
All right, good. All right, we're going to have a slightly different question and answer setup. Nope.
We're going to use Menti again like before.
Oh,
because
okay.
of time constraints.
That's fine. Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
I guess so.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess we'll take questions on Menti. The way, if you found that link, you can put them on.
And we have our first one, actually, if I may share the first question, and then we can go to the audience. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful. The first question, en español. Hay muchas lecciones aprendidas, pero muchas de ellas van en contra de los incentivos de gobiernos donantes y multilaterales. ¿Qué habría que hacer para que estas lecciones realmente se usen?
So the question is about one of the
So there are many lessons to be learned.
The incentives are against the donor country interests. Is that it?
Yes, so the incentives, the lessons learned here, but many of them seem to be going against the incentives of governments, donors, or multilaterals.
Okay.
What would have to happen for these lessons to really be used?
Right. So I guess that, in a sense, for the Carlos Slim Foundation, the Gates Foundation, it is one of the puzzles for me, is why this got picked up. I mean, Ethan was mentioning that it wasn't really you approved it without necessarily knowing what you were getting into. I don't know if Slim Foundation might have been more seen it more coming. But for the two of you, what would you answer to that question? Either what drew your organizations in, or how you would convince other foundations and donors to say this really is what you want.
Maybe I spoke too heavily about not knowing what we were getting into. That was being a little lighthearted. But I think something that actually was really important for us is we always, from day one for our organization, we did frame this initiative as a learning initiative. And I think that sounds a little bit jargony, but I actually think if it was couched in we're accountable for achieving X outcome metrics, the pressure starts to escalate to behave against the way the model is set up. Calling it a learning initiative and having it be framed as how do we achieve these sustainability goals and the aligning political commitment in the countries we're supporting, that recontextualized what success meant, and it bought us a bit of breathing room. But it's a hard question in my view in terms of some of the trade-offs, because our organization, obviously supports work all over the world, and a lot of it is really kind of mainstream approaches. And I think the real difficult trade-off is if you're saying in the next year, if we use approach A, we could have this sort of measurable impact in terms of human lives, or we take this longer approach, B, that in the next 1 or 3 years might not have that same number. It's a very hard message to convey to the leadership or constituents. I know for government donor agencies, the constituents are going to want to see results in kind of near-term timeline. So I do think framing what success looks like and what you can expect as you move along is important. We talked about phase 1 and the inputs and kind of how do you build towards success. I think it has to do with framing.
I'm a little amused by that, not because it's also essentially what we were hearing earlier today about what the local clinics and frontline staff are doing too. They're treating their jobs as learning experiences. So it's kind of like the donor. You guys had to come in with the mindset of this is about learning. So not getting the results immediately isn't really the goal. It's learning in the process. ¿Para ustedes?
Sí, quisiera compartir algo, tal vez interno. Creo que depende mucho del estilo de lo que se denomina donantes, de quién está involucrado y cuáles son los objetivos que tiene una organización que puede estar interesada en una iniciativa de este tipo. Nosotros internamente nunca nos referimos a nosotros mismos como donantes, era como un trabajo, era un término común para poder definir el trabajo. Y tampoco estaba en el centro de nuestra expectativa el results-based financing. Para nosotros, el objetivo final es poder incidir en un cambio en la última milla, en el trabajo hacia las personas, con una focalización en este caso del 20% más pobre en los países. Pero como organizaciones, comentaba, lo decía Ethan, teníamos que ser respetuosos, pero éramos muy hands-on. Nos interesaba mucho contribuir no como donantes desde lo externo, sino en un proceso de trabajo conjunto, en donde teníamos muchos más elementos que traer a la mesa que únicamente el tema de financiamiento. Era un trabajo de discusión, de diálogo, de experiencia acumulada, de aprendizaje, que creo que enriqueció muchísimo a la iniciativa. Me parece que son elementos que han permitido que la iniciativa sea exitosa. No es un proceso de donación tradicional, de filantropía tradicional, y no encuentro desde la pregunta original elementos que los resultados sean en contra de los incentivos o lo que estuviéramos buscando al habernos involucrado. Lo que nosotros queríamos siempre ha sido un resultado nuevamente en esta última milla, teniendo que pasar por los procesos adaptativos que permitan ese éxito, esa continuidad y esos resultados.
Okay. We have another question there? Or can we take one from the audience? Looks like over there, Jerry LaForgia. Please introduce yourself.
Jerry LaForgia, Accesso Global. I worked on the design of the coaching aspect, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about something that Ethan said, and now also Ricardo. And I'm going to put on my hat as a former IDB task manager, a World Bank task manager, and now working with some tasks with the with the Gates Foundation. 12 years. I don't know of a lending mechanism that goes for 12 years, or a donor project that goes for 12 years. I know 5 years, I know 4 years. There used to be, I think the BID had it too, at the bank, the APL, Adaptive Lending Program. I was able to do that once in my career with the Family Health Program in Brazil. But then that was completely shot down because government started to complain. Well, that was done by the old government, phase 1. 5 years later, we're in phase 2. We don't want that anymore. So I know that the World Bank got rid of that program, which I thought was wonderful. So I guess this is more of maybe an open question to the IDB, maybe to Emma, to Ferdinando, but also if we're going to be having a 12-year project like this, and here we are, people saying, well, we could have gone a little longer. We could have, let's think of other things. And I think Gary talked about that some projects, 5 years, you cut corners. Now, I will never admit that. But you cut corners in preparation in order to get it out the door. Maybe you don't do as much upfront work as should be done like you did for here. Or you don't put in too much evaluation at the end, because that's going to take too much time. We who do these things face these pressures from our own management and also from the countries. So it's kind of an open question as to what extent could multilaterals and bilaterals be more flexible with their mechanisms for funding, whether they be grants, whether they be, I think some people use the word contracts, or loans, so you can have this flexibility, adaptation over a long period. Right now, my understanding is it's very difficult. Thanks.
Let's see. Ignez,
Emma?
would you like to take that one, or shall we pass it off to Ferdinando?
Yes.
Perhaps I can start it and Ferdinando continue. We do have some instruments that have this long-term view. We have something that we call CLIP, which is a conditional line of credit, where you approve something to work on the long run, usually is around 10 years. And what you agree is to work on tranches. This is reimbursable funds, that's basically loans, but it does help to build this long-term view and long-term relationship. Now, it's an instrument that doesn't work for all countries, especially if it has to go through Congress, an approval of these projects. It's a complication. But we do have the instrument, and in some countries we actually use a lot. And I had also the luck and the privilege to prepare a few of those operations, and it's really great because you can't work like that. Now, it is true that with change of government, they might not, it's not an obligation to use all the tranche and all the money, so they might get canceled. But if there is a very good policy dialogue, if you are showing results, my experience has been that they continue. So I don't know, Ferdinand, if you want to add that.
Or
Yeah.
$7 million question. But let me say something that is not very institutional. I speak on my behalf, not other institutions. We complain a lot about not being able to raise the bar because we need to execute in 5 years, because we cannot go to the board with a loan that is longer than 5 years, because the Minister of Finance, when I start the administration and they negotiate a loan, they don't want that loan to go through the other administration, even if it's going to go through the other administration anyway. Right? So I think here, actually, we have a big role internally in all these institutions to speak the truth. When we prepare a result-based financing mechanism, and we have many, you have many, we have many, and we talked about some dimension of quality measurement, and I look at the project document, that way less serious than what we applied here in this initiative. So I think it's really up on us to really be serious on some discussion and some design. Number one. Number two, this initiative we went through and we failed. Let's use these words. Today I've seen many cagey people to use we failed in some countries. No? But in other, we had a success, not just because we were supporting with the partners or just the donors, the initiative, very hands-on. There was a lot of willingness on the other side, change the call of the government to continue. Right? So I do think that we have a joint responsibility, first of all, of raising a little bit the bar of what we do. If you speak about quality improvement, it has to be quality improvement first. Second, it's a matter of money, but sometimes no, we have plenty of money of technical cooperation. It's just not very well used, right? And that's why we could continue, for example, in Mexico, even if we didn't have a second or third phase, we are continuing with our grant resources technical assistance. So I know that these institutions are difficult to move, but I think they can be moved. And I think that is our commitment internally to move forward, even with this initiative. So then we can complain about the instruments, about the incentive, etc. But what I've learned in these 12 years, yes, you can move the bar a little bit. So.
And And that's one of the things I learned from Ferdinando, was that rather than complaining about what we can't do, try to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah.
Let's see, do you have other comments? Yep. Wolfgang? And then I think we're going to have to close. Yeah. So you get the last 15 seconds.
Lo que voy a decir lo digo porque Ferdinando lo permite. Esa reflexión de Ferdinando me parece maravillosa, ¿ok? Pero como yo también fui miembro de este banco, así como Jerry, a quien yo reemplacé con mucho honor aquí cuando él se fue al Banco Mundial, aquí yo viví muchas experiencias con programas multifase que no los llamábamos de esa forma. Eso fue muy importante cuando yo llegué a la Fundación para también pensar de esa forma de las fases. Pero eso no es lo que cambió. A mi opinión, y Ethan creo que le faltó decir una sola cosa, el apetito de riesgo que hay que tener para meterse en un programa, como muy bien lo describió Ethan, en ese momento, cuando comenzamos, era la Fundación. Y sigue siendo una característica del DNA de la Fundación y en general de las fundaciones. Yo creo que ustedes tenían algo muy parecido porque se metieron de igual forma y muy rápido. Yo no sé hasta qué punto ese apetito de riesgo se contagió, se extendió o no, pero el banco hizo cosas que yo vi hacer durante Mesoamérica que no había visto hacer nunca. Y creo que el punto de él es totalmente válido. No hay que reinventarse, creo yo, el instrumento, sino buscar una forma de hacer las cosas. Pero el riesgo que asumieron todos, incluyendo los gobiernos, eso es inusual, al menos en mi experiencia en desarrollo.
So I want to thank everybody for the session. Thank you to our panel. Excellent experiences.